Hello Thrivers, welcome back. If you're interested in learning about how to completely recover and move on after narcissistic abuse, complex PTSD, then you're in the right place. My channel is all about recovering and what happens after toxic relationships. So with that in mind, what I was talking about today was love bombing. It's impossible to have an after if you keep getting roped back into relationships that are toxic, okay? And we know that manipulative people have different forms of roping someone in. Well, when it comes to love bombing, it's almost like universal bait. It's bait that works on men, it works on women, it works on people all over the world. And I see it happening all the time in my face-to-face coaching where people will try to move on after toxic relationships. They want their life back. They want to just live in the present, and they wind up getting sucked back into these relationships. And when they look at it, it's like a cycle. They start getting better. They learn about the narcissist. They're doing great. They start to move on, and boom, they're in another relationship with somebody like that. And that cycle keeps on repeating and repeating. A lot of the times that's repeating because you're falling for the love bombing. And in this video, I'm going to help you to know exactly what you need to do to be completely immune from the love bombing. But I'm going to be honest, what I'm going to tell you works is usually the last thing people want to do. Okay, so let's get right into it. First of all, I just want to explain that love bombing is not just somebody being nice, somebody complimenting you, okay? You want people to be nice to you. You want people to see your value and be able to express it. Love bombing takes that to a completely different level. Just to give you an example, okay? My daughter and I were talking about a show that she was watching recently, one of those Bachelor kind of shows, right? And she was telling me how, you know, the woman let this guy go who was really into her. And he had been on the show for like 2 weeks. So I was like, really? He was into her? And she goes, yeah, he got a tattoo of her on her arm. And my brain went, like the brakes went on in my brain, and I'm like, that's not being into somebody, that's over the top. When something is new and you barely know somebody and you are like going to an extreme, then that's the difference between normal kindness, interest, and someone that sees your value to huge red flag, okay? In fact, people that haven't been through trauma, their view of love bombing is that it's repulsive. It turns them off. And the reason it turns them off, and with good reason, is because when somebody's love bombing you, when a narcissist is love bombing you, it's not because you're amazing, okay? And I'm not saying you're not amazing, but that's not why they're love bombing you. They're love bombing you because the faster you will fall for them, right? The faster you will be all in, then the faster they can move on to getting what they're seeking. And that's narcissistic supply. Love bombing isn't about you as much as it is about them. And somebody that hasn't been through trauma, they can feel that lack of sincerity, and they feel that something's off, and it turns them off. Somebody that has been through trauma and has not completely healed, that's when they can fall for the love bombing. It's interesting because as more and more time goes on, as more and more videos are put out there about narcissists, people are getting the knowledge, right? I get clients that tell me, Michelle, I knew, like I could see the red flag. I saw this red flag, I saw that red flag, I saw this red flag. And yet I still fell for it. And sometimes they'll tell me, I even told them what they were doing. I even called them out on their behavior, and yet I still fell for it. Let me tell you that nothing gives a narcissist more supply than knowing that you're onto them, that you know what they are, and yet they can fool you again. That's a tremendous amount of narcissistic supply for them. So with that in mind, I want to talk about 2 things that people do to try to stop falling for the love bombing. And these are great things, okay? The problem is that they're omitting one aspect of what they have to do. So let's first talk about these 2 aspects, and then we'll go on to what nobody wants to do and yet everyone has to do, okay? The first thing that people tend to do is they learn all the red signs I always get phrases wrong. They learn all the red flags about narcissistic abuse, narcissistic behavior, how to spot a narcissist. And there's a ton of information out there. It's almost like they become experts in what a narcissist looks like and how they behave. They can spot it. They notice it. It's almost like they have it memorized forwards and backwards, right? And yet it's not enough. The second thing they do is they start realizing that their self-esteem and their value needs to increase. Okay, because basically, if you're falling for love bombing, it's because the narcissist is using your lack of self-esteem. They're kind of providing you healing, right? You have a lack of self-esteem. They come in full blast saying how amazing you are. They are, in effect, healing in a manipulative way your self-esteem so that you become dependent on them to feel good. So people are starting to catch on, and they're like, okay, so I'm working on my self-esteem. I'm looking at, what I've done with my life, and I see the woman or the man I am now, and I'm feeling better about myself. So they're doing those two things, which is excellent. And yet people that are doing that are still falling for the love bombing. And because of that, they're never getting to the place in their life where they're focusing now on living the life that they really want. Because they keep getting sucked back into these relationships, it's almost like narcissistic abuse is always in their life and they're never experiencing that life after, okay? And the reason is because they are not healing the wound from the past. And it's what nobody wants to do, because the wound from the past, the shame wound that a person has, which oftentimes is the result of being hurt in childhood, right? It has to do with childhood trauma. Maybe their parents treated them with conditional love. Maybe their parents never made them feel as if they were enough. And let me tell you, your parent does not have to be a narcissist to do this. Sometimes it's done accidentally. Sometimes it's done with the parent's best intentions at heart. For example, maybe it's a single parent and they have to work so much, but the child is always alone. And the child has to kind of fend for themselves and try not to make mom or dad feel more pressure. So they're stifling their wants, they're stifling their needs, they're stifling their feelings, not because their parent is abusive, but because they have a challenging situation. Regardless if it was done on purpose, regardless if it was done on accident, if a child grows up feeling not enough, not seen, not cared about, if a child grows up feeling they have to stifle their feelings so as to not upset mom or dad, then they have a core wound of shame, right? Of not feeling enough, and they have had to separate themselves from their authenticity. They couldn't be themselves because it was too overwhelming for mom or dad. Or in an abusive situation, they couldn't be themselves because the anger that mom and dad had at their authenticity was too frightening. So there's a separation from authenticity. The reason I'm saying this is because when that happens, the trauma gets kind of frozen. It's almost locked into the brain, frozen, but it's still there. Okay, and the child is growing up, and then that child becomes an adult, and the last thing people want to do is go back to that wound, because they're thinking, well, that was so long ago. I'm an adult. I look at my life. I know I have value now. Here's the problem. We may not realize that that shame wound is affecting our life, because again, we're thinking it happened so long ago. But the presence of it often shows up unconsciously. It shows up in how we respond to things. It shows up in what we allow in our life. Maybe a lack of boundaries. Maybe it shows up in people pleasing. Maybe it shows up in fear of authenticity. And narcissists can spot that. They can spot it. And what happens is when they're love bombing, it is opening the door to that shame wound and that childlike feeling of, please love me. Please, can somebody tell me that I am acceptable and enough just the way I am? So it's opening that wound up not from the adult you are, but from the child you were. And I know that sounds crazy, but the more you learn about trauma, the more you realize what happens in your brain as a result of past trauma. You realize that trauma gets stuck in the body, it gets frozen, and whenever that door is open to that trauma, your body feels those emotions with the same intensity as if you're back in the past. On top of that, when that shame kind of gets touched on, right, it creates emotional flashbacks. And when that emotional flashback goes off, two things happen. The first thing that happens is that thanks to brain scans and thanks to books like The Body Keeps the Score, we understand why our logic is kind of getting disconnected. What they've learned that happens is that your right brain gets ignited, right? Your right brain is lit up, your emotional brain, but your left brain checks out, and there's nothing lit up on the left side of your brain, which is your logic, which is why you can have all of the red signs memorized, but at that moment you don't have access to that knowledge. Your left brain is checked out. It's not telling you, hey, Michelle, remember that red flag, this person is not good for you. No, that's checked out and your emotional side has been ignited. And what is that emotional side saying? Please see me. Please love me. Please accept me, because the pain of not being accepted is too overbearing. So the second thing that happens is the desire to heal that wound is coming from the past. It's almost like your childlike self is coming up and wanting to be healed. Something else that the book like The Body Keeps the Score helped us to understand is that when you're having an emotional flashback, your brain confuses past and present. So that wound that's coming up, you don't realize that that wound, that shame, isn't from the present, it's from the past. And that's why it has so much power. And that's why afterward, people come to me in coaching and they're like, Michele, I knew. Like, there were times that I would tell myself, look, this is not good for you. This is a red flag. This is not good. And a switch would go off. And I couldn't seem to act on the knowledge that I knew was there. That's the result of an emotional flashback. That's the result of your brain confusing past and present. And that's the result of a past wound hijacking your thoughts, actions, and how you handle the situation. So, bottom line, you may feel good as the man or woman you are today. You may like who you are today, but if you've been through trauma, trauma stays stuck in the body, which means the door to it can be opened at any point, and these things happen, the emotional flashbacks, the living life in one side of your brain only instead of in whole brain states. And when those things happen, we never act in our best interests. So working through that past shame wound and healing that from the past is the only way that you can avoid getting sucked back in by the love bombing. Because if you go into an emotional flashback when somebody is love bombing you and you're starting to go into that relationship, when that past shame is woken up, even though your logic is telling you I shouldn't be in this relationship, what happens is that shame wound is saying, no, I can't let go of this relationship, because if I let go of this relationship, something detrimental is going to happen to me. I'm going to be so morbidly alone. I'm not going to be able to cope. I'm not going to be able to handle it. As a child, you couldn't, right? But since your brain is confusing past and present, those thoughts are governing your present life. So I think what happens is that people start moving forward on their healing journey and they want to work through it so fast that they think they're done. They haven't completed their healing journey completely. And that's what gives access to narcissists when they bring out their bait, like the love bombing. So make sure that you take time to completely heal, because it's only by doing that that you'll be able to close the door to the past, you'll be living in the present and creating and designing your future. And if anyone needs help with that, I have a new resource. It's $79 a month where we meet together live weekly. It's called the Thriver School of Transformation, and it's all about designing and creating your present life while healing the past, but also creating the life that you want and moving forward. So if you're struggling and you feel like you're continually getting back into those cycles, or you feel like the past is still creeping in on you all the time and it's never really fully behind you, you might want to check out the link. I'll leave it in the description box below. It's an awesome community of fellow thrivers that are striving to close that door and really live the life that they should have had if the trauma had never occurred. So make sure you check it out.